All right. Without further ado, I will call up Madhu on stage to introduce her panel and to set further context. Everyone, a big round of applause, please.
So thanks very much. Can I request our panel, Shabnam, Pramath, and Adil, please, to join me. You know who is sitting right here, right? Good morning. Wow. So thank you very much. We have a very esteemed panel, and I'll take a few minutes to introduce them, although I'm sure most of them need no introduction. So I'll start with Pramath. Pramath has worked in diverse fields, spanning business and strategy, consulting, leadership, and academia. He's right now best known as the founder of both the Indian School of Business and Ashoka University, having spent a lot of time also working on media as the Group MD and CEO of ABP Private Limited, but now is one of the gurus for us on institution building. Very happy that he's also a partner for the Gates Foundation in several ways, and we look forward to getting insights from you for our sector. Welcome, Shabnam. Thank you very much. Shabnam has been patiently waiting for her panel. She works now as a Senior Education and Institutional Development Specialist at the World Bank in the India Country Office. She's also the State Coordinator for the World Bank for the low-income state of Bihar and leads the bank's program on enhancing teacher effectiveness in Bihar. She works on skill development and leads the World Bank's program on the role of non-state players in skill development in India. And Adil, again, thank you so much for joining us today. He's currently the chairman of the Quality Council of India. He's also the chairman of Network 18 and TV 18. And he's currently on the board of Reliance Industries Limited, Larsen & Toubro, and Cipla. He retired as chairman of McKinsey and after 34 years there, and is now also involved in major projects of the Government of India, such as Make in India, Startup India, Swachh Bharat, and many others. He's also co-edited a book called Reimagining India. Hopefully we can reimagine the wash sector for us. Thank you, and again, welcome to all of you. A quick background about what we're doing today. We have been talking as a group of partners that we are right now almost victims of somewhat of our own success that Alkesh alluded to. We took a very opportunistic time when the Prime Minister made sanitation a big agenda. And as a community of partners, we saw this was the right time to push an agenda that we really feel passionately about, which is the management of fecal waste. It's an idea that stays fairly hidden. It's beneath our toilets, but that waste, unfortunately, never gets treated. So currently, only 15% at the best of human waste that's generated in India is actually safely treated and disposed. Most of it is indiscriminately treated, not treated, and thrown in the environment, which causes all of the public health impact that we know that poor sanitation leads to. So this group of partners actually is very focused on ensuring that our states and cities actually manage their waste safely and dispose it so that we get the true benefits that we need from safe sanitation. We are super proud that we are very much part of the Swachh Bharat mission, and what we are trying to take is way beyond ODF, that we have ambitions for an ODF plus India where all of human waste is safely treated. So that's an ambitious goal given where we are. We're at 15%. Most of the people who work on this sector are in the room today. and have been working very hard. We've made phenomenal progress. We have a national policy. Many states have their own policies now on fecal sludge management. They're actually committing their own state resources and are now embarked on the journey, have taken a huge leap of faith with us to set up the infrastructure to manage. What we now need to know, as you know, we're a country of scale. Everything is about scale. If we work in one city or one district, that would be considered scale in many other contexts, but never in India. So given the small number of organizations that are working and have the in-depth knowledge, how do we build up the capacity internally for us to be able to handle this challenge and provide the ongoing technical support that governments will continue to need, not just in addressing the first problem, but continuously innovating in the sector and making sure that the sanitation service is of high quality and is inclusive. And what you see now is that we have an ambitious goal. We want to move from this 15%, move the country to 90% plus treated in the next 15 years. That's what we've set ourselves out to do. That's in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. If we get to 50 to 60%, we'll have made phenomenal progress. There has been no such example. But we also know this is a country that can rise up to that challenge. We've already seen huge progress in just the coverage and access to toilets, unprecedented in the world. Right? Even if we say it's 40 to 50 to 60% more coverage, we started with 32%. That kind of access that we've been able to create in this country in the last 4.5 years is unprecedented. So we know that India can do it. It just needs to put its act together, but it needs a lot of sustainable work over the long term. So having achieved ODF, we also have to sustain ODF because the lapse is also fairly fast. And so while we have been thinking a lot together about what we should do around capacity building, about working with government institutions, today's conversation, I want more of us to reflect on how can we as organizations grow, be sustainable over the long term to be able to provide that support. And all of you are worked in these areas, you worked in building organizations, building institutions. So I want us to move to that kind of discussion. So I have a few questions and then we'll have time for the audience to ask questions as well. So my first question to you, Pramad, is given your experience, what would be the 3 most important things you would prioritize in terms of institution building in the context that we have laid out for you a little bit?
Thank you first for inviting me, and I genuinely want to congratulate everybody here for what you do. It's very courageous that you've taken this challenge on, and I wasn't aware of the level of achievement. Maybe we should communicate some of that because there's so many question marks about what's actually happening. But to directly get to your 3, I feel like I'm on a test here. I'll start by one that I'm no expert, firstly, so I'll go by where I have had success or seen success. I think the first is that a lot of us start small, and it's quite natural that you start small. And the assumption is that you start small and then you will grow incrementally, and you will add more and you'll add more and you'll add more, and somewhere you'll get to scale and sustainability and so on. I think the problem, at least I've found in setting up educational institutions with that approach, is that it actually doesn't work and I'm speaking specifically for higher education in India because that's where my experience is. In contrast, if you look at the success of the institutions that I've been involved in, we actually thought scale from day one, and we worked backwards from that. Now that requires a very different mindset. I'm also an entrepreneur in business, so I've set up many businesses, and most of them have failed. All of them have failed to scale. And I do see the problem with entrepreneurship in general is that everybody gets very excited about their idea or their project or helping change things in their uh, city. And then when you become successful, you then start worrying about, okay, how do I become national? Or how do I become a large company? And that's where the failure rate is very high. So very few people are able to do that. And some are able to, some are not able to. So I think it's important that while many people here are doing projects or have small organizations, which is inherent in what you're saying, some people have to go beyond that and start simply thinking backwards from where they think the organization should be at scale. And this is not just scale in terms of numbers, but scale in terms of quality and scale in terms of sustainability. So for example, to make this real, Adil and I are involved in building a new university in Ahmedabad. Now we've put a stake in the ground that this university has to be the #1 university in India. It needs to have 5,000 students and it needs to be in design. Okay. Now the truth is nobody has done this anywhere in the world. What that means is that the decisions we are taking today are all around building a university for 5,000. Yesterday I was with the architects and they were saying, well, do you really need residents for 5,000? And I was like, yeah, we need residents for 5,000. And there are a lot of people in the room who were saying, but can't we just have 2,000 and 3,000 will live off campus? And I was like, in India, nobody lives off campus. You want people to come from all over the country, you have to build residence for them, especially if you're outside the city. So I think in every decision then and every investment and every hiring and talent came up, you are from day one over investing to get to that 5,000 number, and not just the number, but that quality. So I do think that that is the first big ingredient that, and this is not just about having a big vision. I saw vision up there and so on. I mean, we all have big visions, but really thinking through from day one that if this had to be at scale, and maybe I'm successful at 200 students, but if I had to do 5,000 students, what would I do differently and how would I work backwards? And then very quickly to round this off, and we can talk more about this, but I don't want to hog all the time. I think the other two are just governance and leadership. And I think talent came up, but I think talent is a bit of a ubiquitous general thing. I think how you govern these institutions to build scale is extremely important. And I think often things get identified with one person building an institution. It's not that one person. It's the governance model behind that person, which then impacts fundraising, it impacts strategy. So for example, in this case, we have a very large board. In all of these institutions that we've built, ISP, Ashoka, and now Anant, we have very large boards, very committed people. They are all supporting, we are collaborating, and it's very tough to manage large boards. It's a handful to keep everybody happy. I mean, when Adil comes into these meetings, he doesn't have all the background, so he'll throw in some ideas, somebody else will throw on some ideas, and now it's my job to integrate all of this, and it's a nightmare. So I do think that governance becomes extremely important, yet I do want him involved. And so how do I give him that space, yet not find him encroaching? And then, of course, finding the right people in terms of the leadership positions. It's the rest of the talent, we all have a problem, but the leadership talent becomes very important. So I'll stop there. I mean, to me, it's the building backwards from where you want to be rather than forwards from where you are is my first and big point. And then putting in the governance and leadership in place for that.
Fantastic. Shabnam, from your perspective, what would you think based on all the work that you do and more also for the sector that you work in? Could you give us some insights on what you think would be some important things to prioritize for institution building?
Thank you, Pramath, for laying the sort of the background. My perspective is a little different because at the World Bank we work on scale. We work on large institutions, we work with governments, and we are at a very critical juncture of the whole development scenario where India matters. India matters to the world, and what happens in India is going to impact the SDGs or any other growth parameters rather than vice versa. So therefore, it's very critical right now to see how institutional governance and institutional reform processes happen in India. And I found it very interesting that most of the votes went for talent and for human resource development. I think the voting which was being done by the participants. So what is very important now for India's growth is the quality of its human capital. And from the perspective of the World Bank, we are very much invested now for the next few years to ensure that we have the human capital available in a country or globally to be able to make sure that the institutions deliver. And in order for institutions to deliver, the quality of service provision is very critical. And therefore, human capital and how human beings or individuals respond to the requirements of the labor market and how have they been growing in terms of their educational growth, in terms of what is the quality of their learning and how does that correspond to the growth in the economy is very critical. Now, the political economy of India is such that public institutions are going to be the one that we continue to depend on for large-scale programs. For example, you all work on Swachh Bharat. The World Bank supports it with about $1.5 billion. But you know, what is required, or for example, if you look at, we also support Skill India program, which is another 500 million. But what's important for these big-time investments to catalyze and move forward is the agility, the responsiveness, and the accountability which is required in these big public institutions to deliver. And one of the things which we feel is very important, and the World Bank has come up with this India partnership framework for the next 4 to 5 years, is this whole federal story of India, the whole reform in federalism and the importance of state capability. So as hearing Alkesh mention that the Gates Foundation is focusing on 5 states. The state capability piece is going to be very important. How do institutions deliver? Are they agile enough? Are they accountable to the stakeholders that they are supposed to cater to? And the other important piece is also the alternative ways of service delivery, because we continue to depend on public institutions which continue to deliver through public systems. But is there a way that we can look at institutional reform and alternative ways of public delivery where we get in the non-state partners to partner with government to make sure that, you know, the management capabilities and for example, what Pramath is doing or what Adil has been doing in McKinsey, can we make sure that, you know, these kinds of management approaches inform the public systems so that there can be more catalytic action towards reform? So the political economy is such that we have to depend on public institutions, but it's very important that these institutions, while they are inclusive, need to become more competitive. So I'll just stop at that.
Okay. Thanks. I'd love both your corporate hat in this and how you've seen organizations deal with this. I'm sure that in your experience, you've worked with companies and corporates that are suddenly also sort of victims of their success, meaning suddenly they see success and they need to scale to meet market demands. But also you lead now a lot of educational institutes and parastatal, and is there some learnings that each take from the other?
So first of all, delighted to be here and to see such a large number of people. So I guess this is a bit of a scale up, right? I guess if you'd had the same thing a few years ago, you wouldn't have filled such a large room. And I hope that the next year you have it, it's in the full ballroom.
Yes.
Right? I think you're using half or something today, isn't it? So just to give a little bit of my background as to where I'm going to make these comments from.
Yes.
Okay. Last 4 years, I've been heading Quality Council of India, and we've been helping a lot in many areas, especially in Swachh. So some of you might have been involved in some of the things that we've done. I think the World Bank is quite aware of it. We're involved in measuring at a very large scale, because we all believe that to improve quality and to improve the functioning of any program, if you can measure in real time, I think you talked about technology and measurement. If you can measure in real time, you can adjust for it and move on. To do that, we've had to actually scale up very, very fast. So let me talk a little bit about that and the kind of scale that will be required, which I'm not sure we've talked about. You've just talked about going from 15% to higher. But let me just talk about what we did. 3 years ago, I hired my first young whatever you describe it, analyst, fellow, general purpose, smart young person who doesn't know enough to be afraid of what all is out there. Right? Today we have 390 of them. And they're supplemented by people we get from our certification bodies. So currently we have probably about 1,000 to 2,000 people who are doing measurements on the ground of various aspects of Swachh, including toilets, usage of toilets, ODF, ODF plus, ODF plus plus, all sorts of things having to do with Swachh. There's, of course, nothing is perfect, so there are all sorts of issues with all of that. But the ability to measure in real time was very important. You can't measure in real time across such a large country without scaling up extremely fast. Yeah. So we've scaled up from 0 to several thousand in about 2 years. Okay? And it's not enough. We should actually scale up a lot more. And so this is a little bit what I'm going to tell you is reflective of that. I think one of the very good things, as you said, is that there's a huge tailwind because everyone is, the PM was focused on Swachh. There's a huge set of machinery behind it. There's money behind it. And therefore, this is a good time to try and solve the problem fast. If you wait a few years, maybe the momentum will go away. Who knows, right? So whatever one can do to scale up today, let's scale up. So let me give you an example of 3 or 4 kinds of scale up and what it takes to do it. If you look at Swachh Grameen, I think we have Param Iyer, who used to be at the World Bank and now is the Secretary of Drinking Water and Sanitation. I think has 150,000 self-help group Swachh, I forget the name. Swachhagrace, right? Yeah. And it took that kind of movement to actually do a lot of things on the ground. In addition to everything else, all the money that's being spent, it took that kind of scaling up very fast to do it. And he kept asking the NGO sector and the private sector, how can you help us scale up even faster? And after a lot of, people came up with lots of ideas, but today I think there's 1 or 2 people in every district that are being given by Tata Trusts, and maybe another 5 or 6 being given by various other NGOs to make sure that on the ground action is happening. Honestly, it has to be 10 times that size. Right? But the fact that in a year you could get 1,000 young people attached to every district was the kind of scale up that was required. And if you'd added 20 or 30 people, it would have made no difference. Okay? But it required thousands of people to get out there. If you look at what the government is trying to do in these aspirational districts, right? There's 112, I forget the exact number, right? It will probably require a couple of 100 people in each district to make a difference in health, education, and sanitation. And that's probably just to get it going. You might need to do more. So how do you, and this is the right time to do it. If you waited 2 years, nothing much would happen. So how do you get all the organizations and all the partnerships to help deliver that kind of numbers is, I think, the challenge. Right? So the challenge is not grow by double. I think really the challenge is how do you grow very fast to 10x because the timing is very right, and then you can make a lot of difference in addition to everything else. So that's the challenge. Now, let me talk about the institution building part. I think the number, Pramath, everybody mentioned this, but let me just add one part to it, right? Which is, it is amazing what a difference the right leadership makes. Okay? If you have a few people who are extraordinarily driven to get this done, chances of getting it done are much higher. If you have people who are not really keen on getting this done and solving the 1,000 problems required with scaling up to 1,000 people, then it just doesn't move. You cannot teach people how to do that unless they are committed to absolutely driving it. So number one, you need to have the right lead. They don't have to have done it again. They just have so much drive and energy that with a little, they'll catch Pramath and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? Tell me quickly so I can adjust for it and do that, right? So one is it does take the right leaders. I don't know if we have all of those, but it doesn't matter. Get them from any other sector. But if you have the right leaders, actually a lot of growth happens, number one. Number two, I'm just amazed at how many people in India want to do good if given a chance. They're scared of trying to do something good because it means, are you going to sell your soul to the government? Do you have to give up your whole lifetime? Will you ever get any money? I mean, can you survive? And how do I find that place, right? Forget about the ones we run into in our social circles which is in schools and colleges in India, I mean in the cities, English speaking, etc. You go anywhere in India and there's actually an amazing number of people who want to do good. If you can give them a slight opening and an opportunity, you'll be shocked at how many people will apply. Okay? We recruited this 390 people in a year or so without going through any recruiting process. Just friends, because there was so much interest in it, right? So I think if you had to scale up and hire 10,000 people in any organization that wants to do something at scale, actually you'll find a lot of people who are really excited. And if you said, I don't need to worry that they know everything,
Right.
you know, I can teach them. So then your problem becomes, how do you teach so many people at scale rather than how do you get people with energy? So I think the second thing that I learned is knowledge is not that critical for this kind of work. It's critical in, you know, if you're running a nuclear plant, you better know how to run a nuclear plant. But for what we're trying to do, actually knowledge can be obtained, but that drive and energy to do something is what you really want to pick. And if you pick that, then people will pick up the knowledge. And so I think that's the other part of scaling. We always say, you can't do anything in fecal sludge. I'm just making it up.
Yeah,
I know you
yes.
don't say this, right? In FSM, unless you have, you know, been biochemical engineer for 12 years or whatever it is, and built plants all over the world. Actually, that's not true. For what we're trying to do at scale, you need a few of those, but the rest you can pick up if you have people with energy to do it. So that's what I've learned in this, which is if you can get people with energy, you can start scaling up.
Okay.
And then the third part that I will add is, it's a very good thing that the door of the government at this stage on these kinds of issues, especially having to do with sanitation, is wide open.
Right.
You know, in many things it's closed. You know, if you said, I have a great idea on how to make Air India better, chances are the door to the government is closed, right? But on these kinds of things, the door of the government is very open, and they're open for ideas, they want to try things, and so it's a very good time to be able to push to do that. So sorry for taking so long, but...
No, that's fine. So I want to just bring this back a little bit, but the organizations that are here, most of us agree that scale will be obviously delivered and sustainably delivered by the government, right? Sanitation is something that is, you know, the responsibility, especially fecal sludge and treatment. And our institutes have to provide them the technical capability to do that. As you said, government should provide the foot soldiers and to do it in all the cities, and they have some mechanisms to do it. How do we expand our reach? Right now, as Alkesh said, the foundation, has resources, and maybe there are not that many partners, unfortunately, in urban sanitation. Hopefully, we'll have more. We have a limited bandwidth. Our organizations that we support are intensely working, and as I said yesterday, you know, the big challenge, and Alkesh pointed that out today, is the implementation. Yeah, we've got a lot of traction on buy-in, the stakeholders are bought in, you know, the sanitation door is wide open, as you said, and we're, you know, nudging open the door on FSM in a big way. How do these organizations look inwardly at saying, how do I go beyond Maharashtra? How do I go to Jharkhand? And how do I go to Chhattisgarh? Do you think they need to necessarily, are there different models that they can look at? Do these organizations need to go to scale, hire the 3,000 people? This is a question for us because we are all debating that. If I'm one institute, say I'm a parastater, my mandate is to do technical training, etc. And I do have a large infrastructure. Within that, I have an urban sanitation department, or I'm an academic university. And I have, you know, a mandate to teach. But at the same time, I do have this money to also do delivery. How do these organizations now grow to meet this challenge of scale that India has?
Right. I'll make one comment on this because you point, I just want to clarify one thing. Then please, I'll pass it on. I think if you view your mandate as only the government can provide the foot soldiers, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Okay. I think you have to provide technical talent, which is good, and knowledge, but actually many of these organizations can also play a very big role in actually providing the foot soldiers.
Okay.
Not because of anything other than, you know, coordination at the ground level of government is always very complicated. And then when there's somebody out there with a lot of energy who's there every day and is driving the bureaucrats nuts, things actually happen. not because they were technical experts, but because they are just there and driving it. And that the government can't do. Government is really poor at coordination across 5 or 6 different silos, you know. So I don't think you should view, if you looked at the end product that you want, not end product, the end goal that you want, right? It shouldn't be that I will scale up only on the technical side. It's just, you know, different organizations can choose what they want to do. I think universities, for example, have a great opportunity. Our universities are massive. The number of students that they have are massive. The number of students who are actually involved in doing something meaningful to help is very low. The number of students who actually want to do something meaningful to help is very high. So if we can architect something, so I just encourage us to think not just that it's the government's job to provide the foot soldiers. It's the government's job to provide many things on the ground. So I'm not taking that away. But there are many areas of intervention that make a huge difference that the organizations can also do.
So Madhu, I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, and you should tell me if I'm not, because from what I understand you're saying is, and I'm going to bring it down to basics so that I answer the question right. So I'm a organization, an NGO. I started 5 years ago in this space. I'm working in Maharashtra in a district. I've got a working model. It's been very effective. And you're asking me the question, what should I do to scale up? Is that a fair question?
That's kind of the question. Yeah, they're working, of course, not in districts, but more in cities.
Okay, so
And we
cities.
also work at state. So all of our partners also
So
work.
let us say that we've been reasonably successful at a city or a state.
Yeah.
Now there are multiple models, like, you know, and I'm again more a private sector guy. So
Right.
I can tell you that in the private sector, you would go out and open branches.
Right.
Right? You would extend yourself. You would, or you would work through franchisees.
Okay.
Right? Which is a kind of a licensing model.
Right.
So you say, listen, I've got a technology, I've got a model, I've got a way of doing something that can be used by others, and I'm going to go out and do that. My bias is that, and maybe there are the other model is go influence government and make them adopt that as a norm everywhere, and then every state government, every commissioner, every district magistrate does it. Right? So there are multiple models. At least my experience is that the last two are like pushing rope a little bit in India, and it takes a long time. And this is what I was trying to say, that if you have something that works, I would, as a foundation, and maybe get a few people here together and say, how can we collectively think of solving this across the country?
Okay.
I feel that a lot of people are not thinking big because they're thinking from where they have been successful. And I would argue that the mindset to do that is very different from having been successful in a city or a district or a state.
Right.
Because there's not a natural evolution path. It's almost disruptive. You have to say, I've been successful here. How do I build this for the country? And I think that outsourcing, franchising, advocacy is a very, it's fraught with risk in India because I don't think people have the capability to do things. So outsourcing and franchising doesn't really work very well. Some people do it. And equally, working with government and trying to change policy and change methods just takes a long time. So you have to do it yourself is my contention.
Okay.
And if you have to do it yourself, then you have to really think through, like, I mean, Oyo Rooms just got $1 billion valuation yesterday. It's in the papers today, right? You have to think about Oyo Rooms, and who would have thought that, I'm from Patna, and who would have thought that a lot of people now go to Patna and stay in Oyo Rooms. I mean, I don't know how they manage to get quality accommodation in Patna, and I can say this because I'm from there. But a lot of my friends go to Patna and stay, and I'm sure people here go and use these services. There are Airbnbs in Patna, right? So somewhere these businesses, you can get an Ola most likely anywhere in this country. So somewhere these businesses, despite the challenges and the problems of infrastructure, people's behavior, leadership, finding talent, are able to do something across the country. And I think that's the mindset with which, and now again, you may say, oh, that's a private sector example, they have lots of money and so on, but I do think that we have to solve it that way.
No, but I think you've hit on it. That's what we are all now faced with. As I said, we are in that space which an Ola or an Oyo would see. See, they see some success and they need to go big because the demand is growing, and they're doing it from a for-profit motive. That doesn't matter for me, at least, whether it's the for-profit. Our idea is scale. In India, as I said, if we work in one state, that's it. That's where we'll be. Or we work in 2 cities, we have to go beyond that because our goal is so ambitious. It's a hairy, ambitious goal. 90% of waste has to be treated. Ideally 100%, but you know we will never get there. But 90% of waste has to be treated. We're at 15% at best. And that requires a lot. It doesn't require just setting up an infrastructure. Alkesh talked about the 5 pillars we have to do. We have, I would say, a handful of institutes who really understand that. The government part we kind of have cracked because the door was open and we went in quickly. We took advantage of that and said, okay, beyond ODF, let's think of this. So I think we have a lot to learn from corporates, how to do it, how to do this, how to learn from quality, how to do it at the World Bank. I mean, we have to do this partnership well. But internally, what do we have to do is what I think we are trying to solve. And one, of course, you're saying is think big and then work backwards. That's disruptive. Instead of saying go incrementally up. What other advice would you give us?
Well, by the very nature of our work at the World Bank, we work on scale. So we fund governments, we work with governments. So scale is the nature of our job. But again, and you know, just to give a sense, for example, if you look at the skills sector, 1 million young people come into the labor market every year. And the stock is of a varied nature. There may be people who are illiterate, there may be people who are just primary graduates, who are secondary, or who've been in the labor market and who have dropped out and who want to come back. So there you recognize their prior learning and bring some kind of a occupational sort of alignment for them. Now that is the kind of scale, and now we are supporting, for example, the Government of India on its Skill India mission. So we were completely floundered as to how do we manage this scale? How do we manage to address this scale and also ensure that we get the results that we are looking for or what the government is looking for? So basically the strength that we bring to the table is the way we help government design its own program. So project design for us is very important. So a very critical financial instrument that we now use is results-based financing. We tell the government that we will provide funds only if our disbursements will happen, only if certain results are provided and certain results come about. Now, while our partner would be the national government, they have 36 other governments who they have to work with, which is at the state level. So just look at the scale. Then you have 600 plus districts who have to then respond to the requirements of the state governments. So, and one of the other issues in this kind of scale or in public service delivery is the fact that programs and policies are made at the national level. So it's very centrally driven. So how do you unpack this centrally driven, centrally sponsored schemes was what we were struggling to think about. So one of the things which we started looking at was this whole decentralization and how do we look at the bottoms-up approach. So we told the government that if at the national level, you're going to tell us that, okay, this is what is the skills gap in, say, a district of Jharkhand, a Gumla in Jharkhand, or a Banaskantha somewhere, or in Dhenkanal in Orissa. That's not convincing me, that the national government would be able to know what's going to happen in the district level. So what we try to push them to think is that, can there be some district level planning that starts for skills development? Can you get all stakeholders together? Can self-help groups come together? Can you have a 5-year projection of the districts which are available, the industry which are available in that district? Can they give the employment exchanges at the district level a 5-year projection of what are the kinds of skills requirement they have? Can you also talk about the youth? Do they plan to stay in that district or do they want to migrate? And then you plan a costed and funded district level skills plan which can then be aggregated at the state level and funded from the national level. Now again, the funds flowing to the states just because they have to go to the states was not a model which we feel would work. Therefore, we started looking at incentivizing results from the state governments. And that's a model which even Gates or any other institution which works at scale can think about. So we created a 100-point scorecard, which was divided into 3 areas, what were most critical for skills. The first one is, what is your training numbers, what is the quality of your training, and what is the placement that you're doing. For example, we asked the government what is the placement that you would feel be ready to be able to do.
But what were the kind of institutes that actually helped districts do it? So we understand the rollout by the government, but obviously, what is the capacity of the government to do all of the work that you're expecting them to do is what we struggle with, right? And all of us here actually provide that assistance. And how do we take those institutes up to be able to provide that technical assistance across the board? Because we all know there's limited capacity of the government. Competing priorities. If you're fighting for Skill India, I'm going to fight for FSM. Someone else is fighting with that same municipal commissioner for a health outcome or a nutrition outcome. So the capacities are fairly limited. And what we are trying to solve for is how do we bring about that change with our capacities to
So
help
if you look at even the Swachh Bharat, the way it is being tackled by the government of India is through results-based, approaches, where I think QCI is also helping them.
That's true.
Look
That's
at,
the government. That's the
that's
government
right.
delivery. We are talking now. We have to take it to scale. So Adil and Pramath are saying, don't rely only on the government to do all of it.
Let me add to it. I think just to see if this answers some of the questions, right? Which is, see, we have if you look at the urban situation, right? We have 4,000 towns plus a bunch of census towns where we have this problem, right? It's not, we all think about the big cities, but in reality, the scale of the problem is massive, and it's across all of these small towns. Most small towns have hardly any capacity to even think about this problem. They don't have enough, they don't have transportation engineers, they don't have sewage engineers. They just don't have enough. It's not even just a question of time. They don't even know how to start, right? And so how do you get to that? So here's 2 ideas for you, just as you think about it. Today, the ability to train a large number of people is a lot easier if you put your mind to it than it was 10, 15 years ago. Okay? Because you can now, you don't have to grab them, bring them to one place, etc. There are many things that one can do to train people. And I think quite a lot of people in most of these towns are actually hungry to make a difference, but they don't know where to go. If you go, I'm sure as you all are working in various small towns, they're happy to get help, but they don't know where to go to get help. They don't even know how to think about it. And so maybe one aspect of scaling is, why don't you train people in 4,000 towns how to think about the problem in a structured way? Because you've already thought about this. You know how to think about it. Assume that they're pretty smart engineers there somewhere. They are. I mean, that's good enough. They're pretty good. And why don't you train them very quickly on this and make the training exciting and interesting, and it gets them some incentive, etc. And you will very quickly scale up capacity in just this one thing, which is, do they understand the issue?
I'm still talking about even to provide that training, the institute has to have that capacity.
No, I know. So now, first of all, I've taken away, you don't have to hire 4,000 people tomorrow, right? Yeah. Because you're going to train 4,000 or 8,000 people. So now you only have to hire 200 people to train them, right? So that's already, we've sort of figured out how to leverage the scale. So I have 2 ideas for you. Okay. So one was use technology and training, because that can make a big difference since you understand it. The second thing is, most organizations like Gates and others who have grown up in a particular way have very structured organizations and very structured hiring programs, et cetera, right? I think if you want to scale up, you'll have to throw some of them out of the window, because otherwise you'll simply not be able to hire people and scale up to be able to do this. But they are very valuable because they've helped the companies and the NGOs work in the right way and hire the right people. But to scale up, those things get in the way.
Okay, so how do we help these institutes build that capacity?
So perhaps what you need to do is to think as a funder and not as an implementer. There is a difference between the two. You are like, yeah, you are a funder just like the bank. So what an implementing agency will do will be, or strategically approach it, will be different from the way you would be doing it.
I'm not asking the question on behalf of the audience.
Yeah.
I'm asking the question on behalf of my...
So on behalf of the audience, I mean the actual implementing agency, it has to go down to the unit of that particular sector. So for your sector, for example, it has to be, I don't know what is the unit at the district level, but for the education or the skills sector, you have to start with a group of the delivery agents at the ground level. So it will be perhaps a school that you're talking about in the education sector, and then what are the institutional mechanisms at the decentralized level? Because if it's going to be in the public sector, the institutions become very critical at the decentralized levels.
Okay, so I think there's some questions, but I will do what I tend not to do these days, which is act like a bit of a consultant. So here's what I would do, okay? Forget all the gyan. They are your partners. Gates has funded all of these people in some ways. They are doing some things. Let's say there are 40 partners here. I'm making this up.
Okay.
I would pick the 10 that you think are most successful
All right.
in what they have done. I would ask them to send one of their people who understands what they do well. I would bring them to Delhi, and I would run a design sprint process. So, I mean, design thinking is big these days, but basically you put a bunch of people in the room. You have a designer who's a facilitator, takes you through a process to say that if we took all of these successful models, these 10 successful models, they are all non-intersecting, some are complementing. Let's take these 10 models and let's think of how would we make this happen in the 2,000 urban centers in this country. You put them in a room for 4 or 5 days, let them come up, they will come up with a plan. I can guarantee you that, okay? And that plan will be materially different. This is my point again, from any of those 10 ideas in the first place.
All right.
Okay. These guys will come up with something and these women will come up with something. They're completely different. And then as Gates, I would create another partner out of these 10, ask them to become a partner, and ask them to create an organization that becomes a partner and give them the funding to go out and implement it across the 2,000 urban centers of India. And that's the way I would do it. Now, it may work, may not work, but since you are asking for a specific thing, that's what I would do.
Okay. I'm looking at time check. So I have some 5 minutes. I have one last. Can you give me a concrete example that our institutes could take back where you've seen an institute do this really successful, and what you thought was the success factor in that? What was the X factor that worked in that? Or a
I can
corporate,
quickly give you an education example.
Or a corporate and...
Yeah, so I mean, the simple thing is, we run a very successful university in Gujarat. Till Adil and I got involved there, 100% of the students were from Gujarat. We saw the potential of making it a national university. So we said, what works? What do we do? And really, in the space of getting students and getting good quality students, the one thing that I believe works extremely well is outreach to a school directly. The challenge is no principal allows you to come and do presentations because everybody and their grandmother is trying to make presentations about their school, about their colleges, right from here to Pomona College in Los Angeles. Right? So how do you get in there and how do you make an impact on the students and how do you create a model? So for example, at Ashoka, we do almost 700 presentations live every year across the country and across other parts of the world. So at Anant, we've created a similar model, and the way we do that is by taking alums who are available, creating brand ambassadors in each of the cities and each of the campuses, and training them basically to do a presentation on our university, and then supporting that with the web and the social media and the application and the counselors who are, we've done that in a space of 1 year. This year our numbers from around the country has gone up about 50% from zero. So I think there are examples of people doing it. I think you just have to get the right people in the room to think about how would you do it at that level. Clearly what we were doing in Gujarat to get students will not work at the national level.
I'll give you two specific examples. I think about 2-3 years ago, Tata Trust decided that they didn't want to fund, they wanted to execute. Right? And I think today they have about 2,000 people who are actually executing. And that's a very fast ramp up, actually. I think they've done a pretty good job, and the goal is to get much beyond that. So I think that's a very interesting ramp up. Another very interesting ramp up in the healthcare space is something called Piramal Swasthya, which we are involved with. It basically provides telephone services for people to call on various things, as well as vans and motorbikes who go to tribal areas and to villages that don't have doctors. And that has scaled up from, I think, 0 to 10,000 people in about 3 years. So,
What's
two
the
examples.
X factor?
One, it was a very good idea. Two, very good leadership. And three, they had to, they also got some funding from the state governments to actually, state government gave them a contract and they said you have to put 300 vans on the ground in 30 days. Right? So, state governments do these crazy things anyway. So, once they decided that they had to do that, they had to ramp up the entire infrastructure at the back to support that. I think now they're up to 700-800 vans that go to villages and tribal areas, etc. So I think those are two examples of where people have scaled up quite aggressively, and you can look at how they did that.
No, so, this whole issue of what has been successful in a country as big as and the scale that we are talking about, and especially in the public sector, there are hundreds and thousands of examples of what has worked, in isolated cases, what has worked in states, what has worked in different geographies. So one of the things which we've experimented very successfully is how do you use technology to connect these successful examples, so that what we're talking about is this whole lighthouse approach. There may be some districts which may be doing something very well, some states which may be doing something very well, but how do you make sure that they connect with each other and learn from each other? That's again very important, because one isolated case would be very difficult for us to sort of focus on. So what we did was we supported the Ministry of Human Resource Development on creating a portal, which was a knowledge exchange and sharing portal, which is called Shagun, which has become from Shala Gunvatta. They picked up the Hindi name and they called it Shagun. And now they told the government that, okay, you have successful examples, upload it over here. And then they asked and there is a live map over there where whichever state you want to pick up, what's innovative, what is scalable, what's done difference to the lives of the people, you can immediately go look that up. So the importance of technology here is very critical, and how can you connect people to share experiences. And the other thing which I continue to feel very strongly about is this whole strength of decentralized institutions. For example, if you look at the education sector, what can make a difference in a school is not what the school itself can decide, but maybe a collective of say 10-15 schools on which the government has created a cluster resource center. How do you catalyze these institutional structures at the decentralized levels, which again the implementers, the people who are gathered over here, can you make sure that you are being able to catalyze the roles and the responsibilities of these institutions at the decentralized levels to make sure that service delivery happens? And then please don't forget to share what are your good examples or even the failures. That's again very important for others to learn from what has not worked in the larger system.
Okay, great. So we have some great ideas. One is to think big and then work backwards. Two is sometimes success is forced on you and you just have to ramp up, right? And obviously I think a lot of the polling talked about just the number of people, foot soldiers on the ground that you should be willing to invest in. And three, I really like the idea of clustering decentralized institutes to actually help And so maybe we do a hub and spoke kind of model where our institutes become centers of excellence and have partnerships and franchisees borrowing from the corporate sector to actually spread their wings. So great ideas. Thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor to our participants to participate in this because it's a live issue for everyone. Can we have some questions? Yes, please, in the back. And just please say your name, what organization, and who you're directing your question to at the back.
Good morning. Thank you for that discussion. That was quite interesting. I am Priyank Hirani. I come from University of Chicago. I work on the ASCII project. My question is directed to all of you. Anyone can choose to answer. As institutions build capacities to scale up and as initiatives get scaled up, quality is a big challenge. So how do you ensure quality is not compromised within institutions in terms of human resources, but also in the initiatives that you deliver?
Quality council.
I think it's, you know, in a sense, you have to have eternal vigilance on quality. And you learn very quickly what kinds of things you'll have to put in place. So it's something that you designed for from the, so, you know, if anyone of you who is a CA knows that, you know, when you're doing audits, you always have, or not audits, when you're constructing control systems, you always have 3 levels of defense for anything, because that's the way you check quality and you make sure that things don't slip through or that somebody doesn't try to game the system. So as we tried to design it, design everything that we were doing, we tried to make sure that we had 3 levels of quality, and actually we now have 4 or 5, because in the most unique and most bizarre thing that you would think about happens when you start scaling up very fast in areas that people have not scaled up. So first you think about some basic principles of control systems of quality, and then second, react very fast. Because when you're scaling up that fast, you will run into things that you just never thought about. Weird things happen. For example, we are sending 21-year-olds out to check this in the Northeast during the rainy season. And you know what happens? Periodically, you lose touch with them. You know, it's rained, the roads are washed out, the phones don't work, so we had to send the army to go recover them from some road stretch that was, so those are not things that you would think about on day one. So you start out with some principles of 3 lines of defense and all of that, and be ready to react, because when you're scaling up, you'll hit problems that you cannot fully anticipate, but you have to be able to react to it very quickly.
Hi, my name is Swapnil. There is one thing that keeps bothering me, so the question is regarding that. In my own work, the one thing that tests us from time to time, and I think many of us will face that, is this: when the tenders, you know, when we are applying for tenders, there are these vested interests which come into play, right? 2%, 4%, 10%. So many of my mentors say that, Swapnil, this is the cost of doing business, you know. So my question is, should we accept that? And if so, is there extra funding available for that?
Ragini from BBC Media Action, and my question is perhaps to Pramath and Adil, that what is a realistic time frame for setting up an institution that works at scale effectively?
Hello, good morning. My name is Andreas from the International Water Management Institute, Colombo, Sri Lanka. I have a question to Adil regarding quality control or inspection with regard to septic tanks, underground, conventional brick and mortar construction. We found it is impossible to supervise the quality of construction if you have the large numbers, because the amount of cement, size of irons in the reinforcement, you will be unable to control it inside the ground. So what do you recommend?
So do we want to take the first question, which was, is there a cost of doing business?
You wanted to read. I thought that was for you. Is that, will you pay for it, right? I thought that was the question. We are not paying anyone.
We're not paying anyone either for cost of doing business.
I wouldn't do it. I mean, I would go with the people who are mentoring you. I think they're doing the right thing. I know it means loss of business in the interim, but if you're building institutions, you can't take these shortcuts.
That's it. Ragini's question on how fast can you build an institution? For scale?
I look at 10 years. I know Adil will not agree, but I look at 10 years.
And his question on septic time is very specific.
So I think one, so can I answer that, which is, I think you can start scaling up the institution very fast. How long does it take for everything to stabilize so that it will go on forever? I think that is what Pramath is saying. My view is that you can scale things up much, much faster than that. It'll take some time, and as I said earlier, you know, things go wrong when you scale up. It's not that it is, there's a golden formula and never, but you have to have that leadership in place and the ability to react quickly because things will go wrong. Sorry, you all.
His question was on how do you test something when it's down there, but I think it's a very specific technical question. Maybe
We have not done it, but we'll look into it. Listen, we are at a very simple thing. We are looking at whether a toilet was built. We're now coming up with one of the kids that we had this summer from Stanford, just as a side project for a couple of days, said I'll apply machine learning. Since we have a picture of 1 million toilets or 10 million toilets or something, right, in our database, he actually got the algorithm to start learning by looking at the picture. Can you say something about the quality of the construction? Right, but this is just simple stuff, toilets. It has nothing to do with things below the ground.
thank you very, very much. I think we're out of time now. So thank you again.